We're going to do a quick overview of the document known as VA Circular 262414, temporary local variance for certain buyer broker charges. What does all this great big document mean in plain English? It means that in plain English, prior to the Sitzer Burnett case, VA buyers were not allowed to pay any kind of buyer broker compensation as an additional cost at closing paid by the buyer. With the changes that came about as a result of the Sitzer Burnett case, there was a temporary variance put into place that has now become permanent with the VA lending process. This variance now allows that in the event that the home that a veteran is purchasing is in an area where listing brokerages are prohibited from setting buyer broker compensation, which is our local MLS. In fact, it's all MLSs nationwide, or the buyer broker compensation cannot be established by a flow through the listing broker. In other words, the listing broker will not be paying any kind of buyer agent compensation. And in the REPC, in paragraph 4.3E, the buyer has attempted to receive compensation for the buyer's agent through the negotiation of the purchase price and including that or however it's negotiated. Then the buyer broker charges paid or to be paid by the veteran are to be considered in the loan application process. However, if the buyer, your VA buyer, is paying the buyer agent brokerage commission, then that has to be taken into account in underwriting as part of the process of then verifying if the buyer has sufficient liquid assets to pay the compensation to you as the agent, or actually to the brokerage and then you as the agent, and still have adequate liquid assets to qualify for the loan. If the compensation is being provided through section 4.3E of the REPC and indicates that the seller is paying that, it still has to be reported to the lender. The lender will, however, see that in paragraph 4.3E. The lenders are now also required to verify that the amount that is being paid to the buyer agency does not exceed what is already agreed to in the buyer broker agency agreement. Consequently, if you are working with a buyer who is using a VA loan or a VA guaranteed loan to purchase a property, not only will you be required to provide a copy of the purchase contract, which has always been required, but you will also be required to provide a copy of the signed buyer broker agency agreement indicating the amount of compensation that was agreed upon in the agreement. This is not the loan officer just asking. This is now a requirement that this be provided. In other words, best practice is going to be, if you are working with a buyer who is using a VA guaranteed loan, it will be best practice to be in conversation very early with the loan officer when an exclusive buyer broker agency agreement has been signed. Provide a copy of that signed buyer broker agency agreement to the lender so that at whatever point you and the buyer successfully negotiate a purchase, whatever is recorded in paragraph 4.3 of the REPC can be verified against what has already been agreed to. And if there is a difference between the two, for instance, you're negotiating in paragraph 4.3 less than what was agreed to in the exclusive buyer broker agency agreement, then provide a written explanation to the lender what will be done about the deficit. Will it be paid by the veteran at the time of closing? If so, that will have to be recorded against the liquid assets. Or will it be considered paid in full and that based on what you've negotiated with your buyer? All that has to be reported to the loan officer, as it is now, will be part of the underwriting process under Circular 262414. As always, if you have questions, talk to your VA lender, come talk to me. make sure that when you're working with a VA buyer, that that exclusive buyer broker agency agreement is provided very early in the process so that your buyer can go through the underwriting process as quickly as possible.